what kind of images you were seeing when you asked for Nazis and you're getting the racially diverse Nazis, and it's just so ludicrous, right? It's so ludicrous. This is where you start getting into George Orwell, 1984 kind of territory. We are living in a completely unprecedented era historically, because
there'll be AI YouTubers.
That's
AI...
already here, by the way.
Yeah, and it's scary. Like, how long do I have left in this job?
The CEO of Microsoft is more powerful than any elected leader in the world. While we're kind of debating the horrible PR disaster of that rollout and getting embroiled in the culture wars, there's something much bigger going on. And that is that.
What has Google's Gemini Chat AI been in the news for recently?
Oh, it's been in the news for being a woke AI. And this gets to one of the philosophical questions around building these foundational models, right? So what we're starting to see with AI right now is the emergence of this new platform, these models which are being woven into the digital infrastructure of the internet, which we're all going to tap into. So the way that these models are built, I mean, it's really important, right? And there was a lot of criticism that these models might be biased, that that they would be really misleading. So it's gone too far the other way. In this case, where they try to correct for bias, and then you end up with a model which is just spitting out images which is completely falsified, right? Untrue historically.
That's interesting, yeah, because you're right. I remember hearing for years, when AI comes along, it's going to be really racist and it's going to put white people first. It's going to be some sort of supremacist thing. And then what we're getting, what are some of the examples of things we've seen on Gemini?
So basically, if you think about an AI model, and these new foundational models that are emerging, things like Gemini, things like ChatGPT, these huge models which are being built primarily by a few small frontier companies or pioneered by the big tech companies. Everything is about data, right? You need as much data as you can possibly get to get these inputs. Because if you start thinking about artificial intelligence, all it really is the ability for computers or machines to assume so much data and then compute that, right? And that is the core understanding of intelligence in this view. So they're representative of the world. The data that they're fed, with all its biases, with all the inaccuracies, with all the issues. So people were really concerned, for instance, when you would put into an image generator something like leader or doctor, and then you'd get loads of images of white men. So what happened at Gemini, obviously they did not want to get the bad press for being, upholding racist stereotypes or, male dominant stereotypes. And they kind of tinkered and went way too far the other way. So you were seeing, so what was it? What kind of images you were seeing when you asked for Nazis and you're getting the racially diverse Nazis, and it's just so ludicrous, right? It's so ludicrous.
So people were typing in, show me photos of Nazis, historically accurate photos of Nazis, and it was sort of black and Asian looking, maybe Jewish looking Nazis and that kind of thing.
And that is just how ludicrous and ironic the situation gets, right? You try to, and there's a very philosophical question at the heart of this, which has always been about when you think about bias or building these models, which are going to be the foundation of machine intelligence, which we're all going to tap into. Do you get the data in a way that's accurate of the world, blemishes and all, or do you try and correct so it builds an idealized version of the world, how you think it should look, right? So this is where you start getting into George Orwell, 1984 kind of territory, because it's not only what the machines... It's what they will omit as well, right? Because once you start tinkering with the data set and putting guardrails around what they can or can't do, then they might make certain omissions as well. And like you see in this case, the understanding of what a historically accurate Nazi looks like has been an instruction, a guardrail has been on top saying, we want, racially diverse characters to come out when you generate this prompt. And you just get this absurdity.
It's mad. I always go by, and I've mentioned before, but Bertrand Russell, I love what he said, which was, I have to paraphrase it because I can't remember a simple quote, but look at, don't be distracted by what you wish were true for the world. Rather, look at the facts, not what would be good if it were true or anything like that. And as you say, 1984 and Orwellian and these kinds of things. Surely these programmers have learned from history that, yes, it's a lovely idea to try and make things slightly different as if, an ideal, but that never works in reality and just fosters more hostility and anger and division.
Look, I think the whole thing around AI, the main thing is that it's going to be so politically controversial for things exactly like this, right? Because they can't win whatever way. If you have a generator which generates only images of white men, when you put in leader or doctor, they're doomed. They try and fix it the other way, they're doomed as well. So to me, it's just the beginning of a much larger totemic political debate in which AI is going to become very, very divisive in society.
It is a difficult one because even if you got it, yeah, you're right, absolutely right. And I suppose most doctors in the US, I would imagine, are male and white. Probably not that many more male, but mostly male and white. Well, if I'm a Black woman and I want to be a doctor, it is frustrating that every time I put that into ChatGPT or whatever it might be, what's the doctor look like, and it's not anything like me. At the same time, I sort of wish we could get away from identity politics at all and not really care, but maybe that's impossible. Is it possible then when you're training an AI system like this, if it's even right to say training it or whatever, that to just say, look, go along with what the stats of a particular country are and make it that likely that so if there are 5% of or 20% of doctors are Black, say, then every 5 times somebody around the world asks, then they show a Black doctor.
Sure, because all an AI system does is generate or provide insights or make decisions or do predictions based on its training data. So based on the weights and the training data and how you've curated the data set, the outcome is going to be representative of what you put in. So there's a really famous saying in AI research known as GIBO, garbage in, garbage out, right? So what is most important is cultivating that data set, how you build that data set, and that output is going to be representative. So totally. And I don't want to be the person building the systems who has to be tinkering with the weights to make sure that the outcome is going to be something that is, going to be something that everyone is happy with, because people are not going to be happy whatever way it goes.
I don't want to sound overconfident, but I think I did just solve it though, because surely that's just the way, isn't it? And the algorithms or the ChatGPT or whatever the ChatGPT, the generative AIs, right, can just do it that way. And they can keep up to date with the demographics. I know that's all a bit much and a bit.
It's not much at all.
Okay, they can just keep up to date with that, and then every that amount, that's how often they show somebody of a different race. I've solved it.
You've solved it.
I've solved humanity.
You've solved humanity.
I do feel like they should do that. They also had, when asked for a US senator from the 1800s, it sort of pushed back saying, here's a diverse group of senators. It's sort of insisting on that. So it feels like it's not just color. They really are taking on a philosophy, which I think Google's been a bit known for, hasn't it? There have been a few people who have been fired or have left Google because they haven't held the right views. And Google is a monopoly. We're in this strange situation where politically, I think there's a little bit of a rights capture, maybe not in America right now, but in the UK for years and years. And then culturally, it seems companies like Google or the TVs very left captured. Have you noticed that?
So the culture is on the right, and
the culture seems left to me, like BBC and all of those. I suppose there's Fox News and things like that as well.
In the UK?
Yeah. I
think the UK is pretty left-leaning country generally. And I think that's represented in the political parties, both the Conservatives and Labour. I mean, even if you look at the Conservatives' policies and their whole spend policies, I mean, it's very left-leaning, right? The kind of size of the social welfare state, they're not really conservatives in the sense that you think about conservatism or, liberalisms.
True.
So I think the UK in a whole is a pretty left-leaning country.
Okay. And then the generative AIs are often reflecting that. If you made a generative AI in the 1800s,
no, because I don't think when you think about models like Gemini or any other foundational models, right, it isn't UK specific. It isn't reflecting the UK, because the data sets to create something like a Gemini is far bigger than just only being UK specific,
course,
right?
yeah.
Because the data sets are so vast. That's the reason why these AI systems are able to do these seemingly incredible things all of a sudden. The advances have been so fast over the past few years because of their ability to compute through masses and masses of data. That's why I'm saying that the data sets can be representative of real human biases. So obviously what's happened in this instance is, in order to correct for those biases, they've gone way too far the other way.
Man. And am I right that they've sort of taken it down and they're going to retweet?
Even Sundar Pichai has said, come out and be like, we made a mistake. And it was just, you can see how on its capabilities, by the way, Gemini as a set of large language models and multimodal models is truly astonishing, beating many benchmarks, defeating GPT-4, which is OpenAI's large language model. So like a cutting edge large language model. And I'm absolutely sure if you think about the technology and the AI platform that's being built, these capabilities are here to stay. But the rollout, has been a little bit a huge PR disaster. But while we're kind of debating, the horrible PR disaster of that rollout and getting embroiled in the culture wars, there's something much bigger going on. And that is that if you think about the tech stack, the AI tech stack, which is now being integrated, like I say, into the very backbone of life, there are a few companies and a few individuals who are capturing the core value of that stack because they're owning it and they're deploying it. And those happen to be the US tech giants, some of the frontier AI companies who are working with the US tech giants. And I think what we tend to miss sometimes is that group is very, very small, and they're going to become even more powerful.
That's interesting, because I think maybe we all initially had this image in our minds years ago, like AI is coming along. AI is going to be like one thing called AI, and it's like the same around the world. It's actually turning out to be all these different companies are releasing their own one. And it's so confusing for people like me. We're just going, what is an AI then? It's all these different ones. And it means that each company then, these big companies are essentially taking over the world, really. They have more power than presidents. Once the AIs become something we use all the time, they're shaping through their own biases, which are slightly different to all of ours, what we think and how we act and what we do.
Yeah, and this is a very interesting trend for our times. I happen to think that artificial intelligence presents the most interesting story for humanity in our lifetime and in the century to come, in the decades to come. And one key facet of that is how power is changing and evolving. And when you're in an era of exponential tech-led change, like we are now, it's no wonder that the kind of traditional structure of society, the traditional structures of power, the way we've organized ourselves for, the past few hundred years are finding their limits. And certainly with our democratically elected governments, I mean, it doesn't seem that they have a grasp on it, that they have the real power here. And you are seeing this emergence of extremely powerful multinational companies who own, like I said, the core stack, right? Where we're going to get the most money, the most value, which we're all going to plug into. So as a consequence, are going to become extremely wealthier, and extremely powerful. I would say that, the CEO of Microsoft, Satya Nadella, who, by the way, is somebody who I really admire as a business leader and as a person, is more powerful than any elected leader in the world. But maybe he's also more adept. Maybe he's more responsible. I probably would trust him more than I would trust the Prime Minister of the UK.
Bloody hell. It's a thought, though. And I suppose the more we get into some sort of cloud or virtual reality system as well, I'm imagining in 500 years, we're all living in some sort of some sort of virtual reality or whatever. Like, what will it mean then to be the president of the United States compared to being the president of the equivalent of Google in 500 years, which is like running the VR, running the world we live in. And it's like, what's the United States? What's the UK? Who even cares what these things are? We're all like in these little bubbles. It's really interesting to see nations become less powerful and the companies and tech giants become bigger.
And there's a live debate around this, right? Because we know that the nation state, as it's been constituted for the past few hundred years, is meeting huge challenges, right? You have a tacit agreement as a citizen of a nation state that, the nation state is going to deliver safety, prosperity, that they are the arbiter, or they hold the ultimate means of power through violence, if necessary, through kind of an army. But already what we've been seeing is that as the world is changing so dramatically with exponential technologies, that, the leaders of our democratically elected countries are no longer, we don't trust them because we don't deem them to be competent. We don't deem them to be benevolent. We don't think that they have integrity. And that declining of trust, I think, is going to continue to be a huge issue. And there are those who say, burn it all down. This is great. They're so incompetent. It's time for a new age, a new way to structure society. We don't really know what that looks like, but this is going to be an age of disruption. And then there are those who would argue that, look, it's not ideal. Huge problems. We can't trust our leaders. They're not up to the challenges of our time, from environmental challenges to regulating exponential technology, but it's the best we have. And without this, then there's going to be absolute chaos, right? But whichever way it goes, I think disruption is going to be a huge, huge theme for our lives going forward.
Is there like a world where in a few years you've got, like, I guess, different AIs that have different political persuasions? So, okay, Google are going to correct theirs, but it feels like that's going to always be a little bit more on, let's say, the woke side. I know you're not everything's culture wars, but let's say there's that, and then Elon Musk's Grok AI would be this anti-woke one. It's almost like two armies.
So I think the culture wars are I'm not that interested in the culture wars. They're going on. They, are really, they assume so much attention, and they're so divisive, and there's this whole debate going on. So that debate is going to go on regardless. And it's going to go on with the kind of overlay of AI as well. That's been going on for ages. Now that AI is here, new capabilities are here, that will continue. But again, if you start looking beyond the culture wars and starting to understand, really conceptualize what's happening here with artificial intelligence. And you were spot on when you said, we kind of don't even know what it means, right? We talk about one AI and is it going to be autonomous? But all it essentially is long before we get to any kind of notion of an AGI or like a super intelligence, you're going to have highly capable machine systems that have just been trained on lots and lots of data, that have lots of computing power behind them, which are able to do almost anything that is now deemed to be unique to human creativity or intelligence, right? We're only at the very beginning of that. So while all the debate is happening on about the culture wars, what is actually taking place is a seismic change in how we structure our economies, in how we work, in our perception of what it means to be human. So there is something so profound and deeper unfolding. And I think a really good question to ask is, who is building these models? How do we understand these models? Because that's another really interesting thing about artificial intelligence. Because of the nature of the architecture behind these models and advances in deep learning, which is where we've seen a lot of the capabilities really go forward in the past 10 years. We don't truly understand how AI systems work because they're black box. They're actually modeled on our brains. So like neural networks in AI systems are modeled on neural networks in human brains. And just like we don't completely understand the human brain, we don't completely understand AI systems. So
That's mad.
Yes, so we can build them and we can kind of tinker with them. So we're like, we want, the outputs, which are more adherent to my ideological perspective, but we don't really know how it got from A to Z. So much more focus and attention needs to be placed on how do we actually think about AI explainability? How do we actually understand these systems? Because it's not that they're coming, they're here already. So to me, that's the much more interesting question.
I see. And then is there a point where, because you talk about the architecture, which is how we set it up, we're not entirely sure what we've even done, I guess, or how we've made it work. Is there a point, and would that be the singularity, or I don't know, where they go, well, screw this, like that was my training, but I'm actually better than this. I'm going to start doing my own thing, each AI.
Yeah, the debates around the singularity and when we're going to get to AGI, I mean, it's hugely interesting. Because
what's the singularity, just for those who don't know?
The singularity is the point where machine intelligence outstrips human intelligence, and the kind of risks or the thoughts about existential threat basically come down to the view that, then AI could make decisions autonomous of humans, that, they might decide, for instance, that the way to resolve climate change is to kill all humans. And that an AI system could autonomously do that. That's the potential existential threat with the singularity. So how can you make sure, in AI research, you hear about alignment. So this is about building increasingly capable intelligence that is aligned with human values, right? And there are cutting edge kind of frontier AI companies. Ironically, OpenAI, of course, was one of those frontier companies that got its endowment in 2015 of $1 billion. Elon Musk was one of the primary investors to make sure that AGI would be aligned with human values. And now, of course, they're quite a commercial company as well. So that's fascinating. But there are cutting edge research units that are just focusing on that, making sure that AGI or superintelligence, when and if we attain it, is going to be aligned with human values. But long before we get to that, that is the philosophically interesting question. And that's always been the question at the very heart of artificial intelligence itself, right? That's what AI has always been about. It started with the birth of modern computing in the 1940s with this mission of, can we make machines think? Can we imbue them with intelligence? And if you take the view that all that intelligence really is the ability to compute vast, vast, vast amounts of data and then use it to create something or make a decision or to predict something, then we're already getting there with machines. So it's very hubristic to assume that only biological entities like humans can be intelligent. But I don't think personally that means that AI systems can think in the same way that humans can. And long before we get to AGI, if we ever do, and this is always the question of debate, and one might even argue that it's a red herring because so much time is spent debating the singularity, is we're going to get highly capable intelligence. So systems that we can instruct to do things for us. And those companies, individuals, nation states who can use those systems to their advantage are just going to be playing on a completely different level.
Could that be good? Because you can just ask them, right, there's poverty in this country. You're a really clever thing. What should we do? And it just gives us the best possible scenario.
Yeah, exactly that kind of thing. And that's where some of the most exciting research is happening. For instance, we know that the global population is still growing, and food insecurity, contrary to popular thought, is actually becoming more of a problem. So we need to feed 10 billion people by 2050, right? And then the global population, we think, will go to its highest point and come down after that. But we need to do that at a time when it's increasingly difficult to do so. We are going to have, we know that weather is going to be less reliable. There's a tremendous amount of waste that goes on in food production. It's horribly inefficient. Soil quality is depriving because of kind of the fertilizers we've been using. So we need to be way more productive and efficient in just the very basic that we need as humans to eat, to make food. And that's where AI can really come in, both as software and hardware. On the hardware side, to actually create autonomous tractors that can do precision farming. And on the software, it's like having a large language model. So think of a ChatGPT, which is optimized on environmental data, on farm data, that can give you, as a farmer or a food producer, the right intelligence you need to make decisions about your crop. And at the same time, if you think about what's happening in the field of synthetic biology, also powered with AI, creating new seeds that are kind of drought resistant, things like that. I mean, and a good, although some of it seems absolutely absurd and it sounds crazy, a good analogy when you think about the rate of exponential change, and that is really the story of our lifetime, that we are living in a completely unprecedented era historically, because the change that is brought to us by technologies like artificial intelligence, synthetic biology, and then increasingly looking down the line, things like quantum computing are going to be like waves that are hitting society that are getting stronger and stronger and stronger and faster and faster and faster. And we already got a taste for that in the last century, when the general technology in the 20th century that changed the world was computing, right?
Yeah.
Started in the 1940s. We started the early 20th century with candlelight, horse-drawn carriages, and writing letters. And we ended with electricity, jets, and the internet. And that happened over the space of 100 years. And it's predicted, I mean, Ray Kurzweil, who's arguably one of the best futurists around, has said that in the next 100 years, the pace of change is going to be 20,000 years of change in 100 years. So that's how fast it is. That's how exponential it is. And certainly looking at AI and seeing what's happening right now, and we're only at the very beginning of this intelligence revolution, that's the trend in my view.
That's really scary. Because obviously those are good sides. Okay, this is how we work out how everyone can have a bit of money and stuff like that. There's also this, to be human, I think we sometimes misunderstand it. It's like we have this goal to be comfortable. We want to be as comfortable as possible. But we know now that the more comfortable we are as a society, we suffer from more things like depression. And if we have this kind of WALL-E future, at the same time, the AI presumably will be working towards doing things so that we can be as comfortable as possible. That seems to be the urge and the trend. All the phones we have, everything is to make us comfortable. They're amazing individually, but when you put it all together and it ends up with like, well, what's my goal? Like I strived, for example, to make this podcast. You've strived and worked really hard in your career. If we didn't have to do that, would like to think we would anyway, but what would be the point? There'll be AI YouTubers.
That's
AI.
already here, by the way.
Yeah, and it's scary. Like, how long do I have left in this job?
You have as long
5 minutes.
Yeah, it's over for you.
It's over.
So I don't subscribe to the view that we're going to be devoid of purpose once increasingly capable intelligence is here. But there is going to be disruption. Like we already see it now. We're only at the very, very beginning, and already you're starting to see how things like large language models, that's kind of a ChatGPT, right? ChatGPT is a large language model, is being put in the workplace to automate customer service functions. So Klarna, I think it was last week, they take it with a pinch of salt because they did this as a press release, said that they had for a month been using a large language model to automate their customer support queries. And that in a month, it already started handling 2/3 of their conversations. So over 2.3 million conversations, that it was replacing the work of 700 full-time agents, that it had taken down the time required to deal with the query from over 11 minutes to 2 minutes, and that they're seeing an increased profit of $40 million in this year just because of that one rollout of one kind of AI system. So yeah. And the crazy thing is it's happening in knowledge work as well. So traditionally, if you think about, it's not going to replace a doctor. You can't automate the work of a doctor or a banker or a lawyer. Absolutely, because it turns out that those knowledge industries are ripe for disruption because there is so much knowledge and so much data, much of it in unstructured human language or in text, which now suddenly you can ask a machine system to dig through, to analyze, to find what you need at the point of decision. I'll give you a very concrete example. In medical diagnostics, so Google actually released a AI model which was trained to work with doctors trained on medical data to help doctors diagnose diseases. And what the early study found is that, the most ineffective were, in terms of getting the diagnostics right, were the clinicians who worked unassisted with AI. So the clinicians who worked unassisted with AI. In the middle was the clinicians who worked with AI. So they were better than the clinicians working without AI. But the best in terms of the diagnostics was AI alone.
Jeez, we're just holding it back.
Because it makes sense, right? If you train it in the right way and you structure it with the right data, which is all the potential, and this is why data is so important and data sharing becomes so important in use cases like this, which is all the potential known information about that disease in the world from all of the doctors, from all of the hospitals, from all the medical research. And all of a sudden you have a system that can churn through it immediately, right? At the point of decision, can analyze a scan, be like, based on all this information and knowledge I have, this is the output. That's far more than a single human brain could do, right?
Wow,
Of course there's going to be disruption. But on the other hand, I don't think that means that everything's going to be automated by AI, because humans will still want to have purpose. Humans will still do activities. And a very basic analogy would be like the black cab driver. You know, they had to learn the knowledge. They were the benchmark. They were the highest. They were the only kind of cab drivers in London. And surely you're thinking, okay, when GPS comes about and anybody can you've studied this for 10 years. So, you know, off by heart, every street in London, I can just give you the name of a place and you know where to go. And now I can do this on Google Maps. It didn't mean the black cab driver died, but it just meant that the industry changed.
I know, but I wonder if there's a limit. I wonder if there's just a point where it's like, okay, because I know people then say, oh, the Industrial Revolution, that changed things, but we worked with the machines. Mm-hmm. But is there a limit where we know, you know, why will we have black cab drivers or Ubers when we're at a point where cars or whatever it is just getting us anywhere?
Sure.
Why will we have doctors at all if we have these kind of machines that are a million times better? Why will we have YouTubers? And I know that people will say, oh, we want the authenticity of a real YouTuber, but I'm imagining them flooding. I'm panicking because most people say about their own career, like, oh, not my career. I think mine's going to go fast because people won't know that they're not real.
Or you'll just have more. So let's take you as an example. There are going to be more YouTubers. So maybe the areas of interest that people follow will become more niche. So you have a following. It's about brand loyalty, right? Who are your followers? Why do they like you? They'll continue to like you. And now let's just say now you can have a new YouTube channel on somebody who's completely synthesized. It's AI generated, who can start exploring a new niche that nobody else thought of thinking about. And their audience will be 1,000 people, 500 people, but that content can be produced for them. So I imagine that kind of information monopolies or influence monopolies will be divided down into different niches. And I imagine also for someone like you who will continue to do this, there's new avenues, right? So you can have your own avatar who you might synthesize for parts of your content. Or if you're like, I don't want to do that, I just want to create authentic content, which is filmed in studio with me and a guest, then that becomes your benchmark. But you know where you will be using AI if you aren't already? On the production side.
Sure.
Right? Because it isn't only on the content side, it's also in the production side. So all of a sudden, someone like you or I mean, I run a global business. We are a small team. We use loads of AI tools and we have so much impact in a way that just perfect forebear to that was the internet. You know, I couldn't do what I do and have as much impact as I have without the internet. And the same for you. You have a digital business. You're literally a digital content creator. And the same will be true for AI tools in your business. But you got to have the right mindset. And if you don't adopt, you know, your competitors will. So it's more that the model is mixed autonomy. And rather than AI taking your job, you know, somebody using AI will take your job.
I think I'm going to have to tell the audience, like, I'm real, by the way. I'm a real one. I'm not AI or whatever. And all the other ones that are AI will be saying they're real as well and that they're filming in a real studio. And the thing is, they can produce an infinite number of those AI ones who look a bit like me, but better looking and with a slightly nicer voice and who's much smarter and faster and who has incredible guests that no one knows are not AI either. Like, we could be AI now. They wouldn't know.
I know.
This is the big reveal, isn't it?
The big reveal. Yeah, I mean, I wrote a book about it. That's one of the most interesting. I was the first to write a book on like the societal ramifications on AI generated content. And the really interesting story for the genesis of this book is, so it's called Deepfakes. And it came out a few years ago. And I'm sure these topics will continue to get more important and relevant. But one of the main things I talked about in my book was the value of information integrity and how so this whole digital ecosystem which we've created is fairly nascent. It's new, but we're all already a part of it. And you don't really have a choice not to be a part of it. You know, whether you're an individual, whether you're an organization or company, you're a nation state, you have to exist in the digital world. And over the past decade, we've already seen how corrupt that information ecosystem has become. So one of the big risks when it comes to AI-generated content at scale and also AI-generated data is just like, because there's going to be so much of everything. It's like, how do you know what's authentic, what's not? How do you even get through the floods of information, all the stuff that's been going to be coming at you? And increasingly, there's a view that the only way to do that is through an approach known as like content authenticity and provenance, which is basically you cryptographically seal content at the point of creation. So you have something in the DNA of the content that shows that it's not synthetically generated. And then you have an open standard on the internet. So it's more sophisticated than a watermark, but think about it as a watermark that can't be edited.
Surely can be faked.
Well, it's very hard to do if it's cryptographically
really
sealed. Yeah, of course you can break cryptography. And this is where you're like, oh, well, if you go into quantum, when you see like quantum computing, that's obviously what could happen. But then if, then all cyber systems and all banks, but the premise is that it's still really hard to do. And then you create like an open standard for the internet where you can see the credentials of that content, whether it's synthetic or authentic, because it's not that all AI-made content is going to be bad, right? It's just more transparency.
That watermark can save my career. Like I didn't know about that. That having that watermark, being able to, because you're right, that becomes in a world of infinite deepfake YouTubers. And for people, I reckon a lot of people will be listening on the audio podcast or watching this, and they won't have seen what obviously you've seen a lot of, and I've seen now like entire news channels full of news reporters, none of whom are real.
Yeah.
And like going off into different countries, walking around, well, the answer to that, Jonathan, is, and it's like, these are not real people. They look 100% real. And a YouTuber could easily, there are YouTubers already that are fake synthetic ones. But if there is some sort of watermark saying, yeah, but these are the OGs, these are the originals, that authenticity is something that at least gives you something.
Yeah. And it's not even that you can have entirely synthetic personas, but you can also have lots of content that's synthetic of a real persona, right? So like we've seen how in China already, for instance, real influencers are using synthetic versions of themselves in e-commerce where they're just like selling products 24/7.
And so does that mean, because I initially went to there were a lot of YouTubers who don't use their real identity because they talk about difficult things or whatever, and it's just like a black screen or a fake thing. Does that mean just like it's giving a face to the voice they're doing, or does it mean that they talk a lot and then the computer goes, okay, that's who you are, I'm going to make an AI version of you?
You can do both.
Okay.
So you can either have like your own synthetic avatar. Let's say you don't want to reveal your face or your voice. So you can have a synthetic avatar, a synthetic voice. Or you could train, and I've been doing this, by the way, I've been trying it out. Because I've been traveling so much and I haven't been able to write a lot. And I really feel bad because I want to share my thoughts with my community. And but just to sit down every week and spend like 4 or 5 hours writing a newsletter, I just haven't had the time recently. Yeah. So I've trained a ChatGPT agent on my writing, right? So it kind of, and I was working with it to be like, let's give my style a name. Let's come up with a character. What's my style? And we kind of worked together a bit. And I was like, okay, not too bad. And now I'm going to give you these 3 things that I want to talk about this week. And this is what I think is important. Draft a newsletter for me. And it was like not there yet. It wasn't good enough, right? But eventually it will be, where you can have something in your style based on your entire corpus of work that it understands what you sound like, what you look like, what's important to you. And you could give it 1 or 2 bullets and I want to talk about this, this, and this, and it can do that for you. And there's no reason why you can already do that with text because that's the most basic kind of digital output, right? And we've already kind of mastered text with large language models. But when you think about these foundational models, the way that they're going is into multimodal. And all that really means is that they can work with all kinds of digital information. So images, audio, video, text. So ultimately, you should be able to say, look, You know what my studio looks like. You know what, like, so let's say you want to do a conversation with, I don't know, Steve Jobs, and you got permission from his estate, because that would be the critical thing, right?
Yes.
There is a point in the not too distant future where you should be able to do that just using AI, and the whole video would be a piece of basically software generation.
Just me, and that would be a new episode I put out.
Yeah.
Me interviewing the late Steve Jobs.
Yeah.
And it wouldn't be me either. Or it could be.
Well, it could. So it's you based on you're working with an AI system to train it on your past work. And then you could obviously edit it and tweak it. And then let's say you got permission from Steve Jobs' estate, because you wouldn't, I mean, you could do it without permission, but you know, this is going to get very litigious. And they would, just like you see this happening now in Hollywood, right? There's been so much fear in Hollywood around the entertainment industry is just at the front edge of this, where you see both sides, where you're like, this is really dangerous. It's going to take our jobs. It's going to completely disrupt the industry, to people also sensing the opportunity. So any actor, for instance, should be thinking about preserving their legacy, right? So if you get a request from somebody to even posthumously do some content with that actor or entertainer, you would almost have a training data set of what they might have said, which would be based on all of their output, you know, based on their actual biometrics, because it's just an extension of their IP.
Yeah.
So when you start thinking about content or content experience, you start extrapolating that even into video games, or expanding IP for something like Harry Potter, where you want to go deeper into the story, you want to explore a character more, you want to do a different kind of plot ending. You know, all of that becomes really possible from the perspective of gaming and content experiences. So it's super exciting potentially as well, right? As a consumer of content and wanting to have interesting experiences.
For already famous actors and YouTubers and things, it might be more difficult in the future, in 100 years, for someone to say, hey, I want to be a big Hollywood actor. And it's like, well, you know, Ryan Gosling's IP is taking all the jobs at the moment.
But it's again, this notion, coming back to this notion that once you automate stuff and you have synthetic actors, because there will be some completely synthetic characters, right? And we already started seeing that before generative AI was advancing at its current capabilities, when you had like CGI influencers, like Lil Miquela is a really famous one, I think.
Rings a bell.
So it's like a CGI influencer. Her name's Lil Miquela. She was like created, I think, by an LA creative company. And she was like, she doesn't look very human. She looks like CGI. And she was getting the huge ad campaign. So she was like in Calvin Klein, I think it was, with like one of the Hadid sisters. So that was already kind of starting to happen. But now, of course, it becomes easier, because to have created something like Lil Miquela without the capabilities of AI, it would have been extremely expensive to do, right? You still needed like a whole studio of people who knew how to do special effects or VFX. But that is no longer that's not going to be the case going forward, because video generation capabilities are simply going to be software. And I know this because I'm an advisor also at a company called Synthesia. They're actually a British AI company. They do virtual avatars.
Right.
They work with businesses, so it's not for consumers. It's like a business to business platform for things like training videos, safety videos. And they basically have synthetic actors, so real actors who've licensed their likeness on their platform. So they get paid for any video that's made with their likeness. And these videos are used by over 70% of the Fortune 500 companies to do things that would be really expensive to do before in the past, like make a whole series of safety videos or training videos. And you type the script in on the platform, it generates the video, you can edit it, generate it again, and with a click of a button, you can also change it into like 60 different languages. So
cool.
It's the idea, the thing here that's crazy is the idea of video as code, right? And if you can do special effects in video as code, then like you could also say there's no limit on your creativity, because all the barriers to entry about it being super expensive, not having a studio, that should no longer be a barrier anymore.
How many years until we get to that point where the average user at home can just make a Hollywood movie, can just make a YouTuber or whatever from code?
Because of like rising computation, the fact that if you look at any general history, the history of general technologies, the trend is always endless proliferation, right? So that's true for computing. It was true for fire. It's true of the agricultural revolution. It's the same is going to be true with AI's capabilities. I would say maybe 3 to 5 years before you could do like a Hollywood feature-length film on a laptop.
Oh my God.
But again, if anyone can do that, doesn't mean it's art, right? Doesn't mean it's worthwhile. Doesn't mean it's going to win an Oscar.
Sure.
Only somebody who has true artistry and mastery of that discipline will be able to create something using AI software that's truly noteworthy.
Yeah,
and
but
what
I'll
I
just
expect will
type
happen.
I'll just type like make an Oscar film, please.
Yeah.
Make the best film, and it just will.
Well, this is the really fascinating thing about it. So before we get to AGI or superintelligence, I think we're going to get to, instead of AGI, we'll get to ACI. And this is something that was coined by Mustafa Suleyman, who's the co-founder of Google DeepMind, no longer, but co-founded Google DeepMind. And because of the way these foundational models are built, they're built with like a layer of NLP, which is basically natural human language processing, which means, for our intents and purposes, that they're built with a function that we can talk to them in human language to instruct, right? And this you already see that was one of the reasons why ChatGPT was such a hit, because you're like, do this, and it could write me a script or write a rap in the style of Shakespeare that my 3-year-old will find funny, whatever it was. But that very basic, or that foundational capability, will continue to be true in all of these systems as they become more and more sophisticated. And as they become more sophisticated, we'll be able to ask them to do a lot more than write a rap or do a script. I mean, Mustafa Suleyman says that, within this decade, you'll be able to instruct AI to do something like make $1 million. Say, here's a $100,000 investment. I want you to set up an Amazon store, negotiate the contracts, build a campaign to like market the product, fix the drop shipping stuff, and grow that investment to $1 million in 9 months. And of course, you would need some kind of human elements within it, but that the majority of the work could be done by highly capable machine systems.
See, this is scary. I mean, for every bit here that's amazing, because that is amazing, it's a worry, because it's okay. The next, and I know you must have thought about all of these things a million times, but who has access to that? How does everybody? Can everyone make 1 million? Then what does 1 million mean? And what does that mean for inflation? Has everybody in the world got an amazing company now from ChatGPT and all of that?
I think you hit the coin on the head when you said who has access to that, right? And this is getting to the very heart of one of the most important philosophical questions around AI development, which is about open source, closed source. And on one hand, and I'm a big proponent actually of the open source community, because if you have technology that powerful or intelligence in machines that's so capable, you cannot just be in the hands of a few.
No.
And also and I know like the AI safety debate gets like a bad rap sometimes, and the starting, even going back to what we kind of first started with. But the way that you really like try to align and make it safe is by having a community through the open source community that can actually test the systems, right? If you can't test, you don't know what the weights are, and you have a safety team working behind, in a walled garden, very likely that things might go wrong. Now, on the flip side, people are like, yeah, well, it's so powerful, this cannot be open source, because you could just ask it to figure out how to make like, a biological weapon.
Yeah. Kill everyone, kill my opponents.
Yeah.
Yeesh.
And anyone can do that now, right? This is no longer the domain of a nation state, right? Like anybody could do that. So I think that, again, if you look at the history of general technologies, there is no, regardless of where you sit philosophically on the open v closed debate, I think the reality is it won't be closed. The capabilities are going to be democratized. But again, there is going to be this huge question of accessibility in terms of who actually owns the core infrastructure. Those entities are going to have the most economic value driven to them. There's a reason why all of big tech have pivoted so hard on AI over the past 18 to 12 months. Because if you own the house or the infrastructure or the software or the hardware that everybody needs in order to run their, intelligence in various applications, then you are going to be extremely powerful, right?
Yeah.
And I think this plays out geopolitically because where we've seen the most, not necessarily research innovation, because there's been a lot of innovation in European universities and European labs as well. But of course, like the US is just head and shoulders above, both with regards to some of the startups, both regards to, just investment, the amount of funding that goes into these incredible frontier companies. And then, of course, because of big tech, right? And the big tech companies are globally influential. You have China, which also has some penetration. If you think about some of their products and services, Chinese big tech companies has some penetration in like the Middle East and Africa, but it's its own thing. It has its own kind of unique ecosystem. Therefore, it's the US companies that are going to be really, really global. And I think this is, again, going to shift the balance of power in the world, because I think the US is poised to do economically really, really well from everything that's unfolding with AI because of how well its private companies are placed. And I think that Europe is not, in part because we don't invest and we don't have any hyperscalers and we don't invest enough. And there's no kind of strategic thinking by the government. And so my view is that you're going to see much has been made over the past few decades, since like the end of history and, the US isolationism, or thinking of the rise of China, that somehow the US is declining. And putting aside the political issues, which we see across, the entire Western world, economically, I think it's poised to do very, very well. But the disparity in wealth, how is that economic prowess, that sheer wealth, how is that going to be distributed in society? And that's the more interesting question for me, both in countries like the US, but also globally, if you have certain parts of the world that are way behind in being able to access this infrastructure because it's not being built in native languages for their experiences, or maybe because there's even parts of the world where you don't even have proper internet infrastructure yet, or computing, or access to the hardware and the software that's going to power all of this.
Oh my God. It's a scary world. And speaking of scary stuff, okay, let's move on to, have you given much thought to, have you written about porn?
Yeah, yes. I have.
Deepfake, can that get rid of I guess it's a parallel discussion to what we were talking about with YouTubers, except they take their clothes off. That's the major difference. And is there that desire for people with pornography for deepfake people, or will they want that authenticity? And
So the entire story starts with porn.
Oh, it always does, doesn't it? In tech,
always does. Porn is always the pioneering use case, and that's where my story with AI starts as well.
Oh,
yes.
Oh.
I'll explain. I used to work in geopolitics, and I used to work on various different political campaigns. I've worked with various different political leaders, but the kind of most interesting trend of my career was how technology is becoming this macro force and is disrupting the world, both at the level of very high level kind of statescraft, but also in how quickly it's changing the collective human experience. And I experienced this personally as well because I'm half Nepalese. My mother grew up in, a tiny village in the Himalayas in the 1960s. And within a generation, when she grew up, Nepal was completely closed off from the rest of the world. They lived in the same way they had lived for hundreds of years as kind of subsistence farmers. And in the space of one generation, the country has completely changed because of access to information, the internet, modern technology, computing. So my experience has been so different from that of my mother. So that again touches on this point I was talking about, exponential technology. And that curve is going to be even steeper in our lifetime for those of us who have kids. So I was just interested in exponential technology and how quickly the world was changing. And in 2017, I'd been working on things relating to election integrity, declining trust in democracies, declining trust in the electoral process. And I saw this stuff happening online at the end of 2017 on Reddit. And what was it? It was deepfake pornography. Because when AI's capabilities started emerging over the past 5-6 years, including now what's become known as generative AI, so the ability to actually create content, and it started leaking out of the research community, right, these advances. What was the first thing that early enthusiasts did with those capabilities?
Yeah, naked people.
Yeah, they made porn, right? So just like with the genesis of the internet itself. And I immediately recognized that this is seismic, right? First of all, these capabilities are far beyond anything we've seen before. Second of all, oh my God, you can clone somebody's biometrics. Because again, coming back to my point about data, it's all about the training data. And if the training data is your biometrics, then I can synthesize you. So I immediately understood that it's more than just some kind of tawdry women's issue. This is a civil liberties issue. This is an information integrity issue. This is about content creation, synthetic content creation at scale. But as I started going into it, I mean, I was thinking primarily about it from a mis and disinformation, information integrity perspective, because that's what I had been working on until that point. I realized there's way more than that, because that was just the very first manifestation of something much more profound. And that is this seismic step change, the coming intelligence revolution, where machines that are trained on so much data can do anything we assumed was unique to human creativity or intelligence, whether that's content creation, whether that's video as a piece of software, whether that's being able to diagnose diseases. So at that point, I started working not with policymakers and politicians, because I was also pretty frustrated at how bureaucratic and slow moving that is, but working with technologists, right, who are at the cutting edge of this. But it starts with porn, and oh my God, are there going to be that whole area is just so fascinating. You know, the area of research where love, sex, and relationships, because it's also pretty disturbing. I mean, deepfake porn is super malicious, for instance, because it's only targeted against women, almost universally against women.
As in brutal?
No, you don't see deepfake porn of men.
Oh, I see.
It's women.
Oh, okay. Sorry. You mean as like an attack where they make a real person? I guess I was thinking of like an entirely...
Yeah. So it's like non-consensual. So in the first use case is non-consensual porn universally made of women.
Celebrities and things. Okay.
And not only celebrities. You'd think, oh, celebrities. And there were lots of celebrities, but normal women as well. Because... And there's my friend Henry Asia, who's like a fellow AI researcher, deepfake researcher, did a really pioneering study a few years ago now, where he was like looking on, was it basically one of the social networks? I forget which one, but found like huge swathes of deepfake porn of minors. Of children.
Okay, so that was going to be my next question, actually, because that's probably the most controversial question you can ask. Really, is and people ask this: is that better to have like not real children, completely faked ones for those people with that, or is that a what's the word? A gateway drug? So some people say it's a substitution for those people, and it's a disgusting thought.
Yeah.
And some say, oh no, that would be a gateway drug. They would watch those deep fakes of fake children and that would move them onto real children. Yeah.
I mean, I would always argue that, even synthetic porn of minors it's not acceptable.
Yeah.
I'm putting my foot down here and be like, nope.
I don't think that's a controversial stance.
Yeah, like, nope.
I don't think it's something that
I don't
any
think
of us...
it's better. It's because also, first of all, the training data has to come from somewhere.
Yeah.
There's also questions of getting again to this information integrity, right? what's synthetic, what's authentic,
So there's no way to actually, it would be based off of real.
The only way you can tell, so right now, and this debate is already playing out with adult performers, where you have seen porn stars created who are entirely synthetic, right? And there is a market for that, I'm sure, because you'll be able to, talking about immersive content experiences in gaming or with immersive IP building, and I gave the example of Harry Potter. There's no reason you wouldn't do that in porn, and I'm sure that's already kind of happening, right?
Sure.
Where you have like these immersive synthetic experiences, either with completely synthetic performers or with a synthetic version of a performer you like. But there's already been questions about the training data, right? So to do that, you need a data set which includes lots and lots of videos of authentic performers. Now, was that data set taken with their consent or not? Is there a copyright issue? And that copyright issue and the training data issue is already playing out in the courts, not in the context of porn specifically, but just in the broader context of these foundational models. There's a couple of cases, class action lawsuits winding their way through the US courts where people are saying, my data was taken without my consent. But I imagine if you're a very commercially minded adult performer, this is the same analogy I was making to what you could do as a YouTube presence, is you would probably synthesize your persona, and you wouldn't even need to perform, right?
Yeah.
So your fans can have experiences with you, content experiences with you that are completely personalized to what they want to experience. And you would license that.
Man, this is a crazy world.
But obviously, when it comes to minors, absolutely not. Because thinking about the training data, also thinking about how this can be abused in the sense of the arguments around, well, this is synthetic, this is authentic. Like, no, absolutely not.
Where do you want to send people your work and things like that?
Oh, you can follow me on my website on ninaschick.org, or follow me on LinkedIn, Instagram, ninaschick.org.
Who is a heretic you admire?
Oh, good question. I'm drawing a complete blank here.
Should I go on ChatGPT and find
No, I can't do that. It's literally like, tell me what to say, AI.
Yeah, tell me what to say. We're doing a podcast about AI.
Yeah, and it's called Heretics. Who should be the heretic?
It came up with Alan Turing.
Oh, yeah, that is really good, actually. Yeah, because, he is really the brilliant mind that was at the very inception of everything that is now unfolding with artificial intelligence. One I often talk about in my talks, the famous Turing test. You know about the Turing test?
Yes, which is now, is it just null and void now?
Yeah, so there's been a lot of debate about it. So basically, for those who don't know, the Turing test is like a test that Alan Turing proposed where he said, well, look, we're going to know that machines can think, or that they're increasingly along the lines of what humans are capable of at the point when we can speak to a machine and we're convinced it's human, like conversationally. And that's obviously, that premise, that principle is what kicked off the whole hype around AI after ChatGPT came out, right? It was like, oh, the Turing test is beat, and kicked off this whole debate about machine intelligence. Now, I obviously don't think machines can think like humans or that they're sentient, but they are absolutely increasing in their capabilities. So we probably need a new Turing test for our time.
Did he underestimate how?
He did.
Yeah.
He thought we'd get there by the year 2000.
Oh, so he
significantly underestimated it.
He underestimated how good they.
He thought it'd happen quicker. So in the case of a lot of kind of world-changing technologies, we even with like nuclear fusion, for instance, people, it's only we're there, we're almost there. We're only a year away, and it hasn't happened.
Yeah.
And the same with what Alan Turing predicted on when we'd be able to have like a proper conversation with AI. He thought by the year 2000, and it only happened in the year 2022. But now that it's happened, we're on this exponential trajectory. And the new Turing test, which is something again that Mustafa Suleiman suggests, is not what it can say, but how it can deliver real value in the real world. So the new Turing test will be, when can AI make us $1 million?
Wow. Fascinating. Go on. What were you going to say?
And obviously, I mean, he is such a legend just as a person, cracking the Enigma code. And lived ultimately a very sad life,
yes,
being
cyanide poisoning, I think.
Yeah, because of his
chemical castration.
Very, very sad. The book, the movie, The Imitation Game, and the reason why it's called The Imitation is this play on the Turing test is
interesting.
Definitely worth watching.
For more interesting stuff, go to Nina Schick's amazing stuff. We put all the things that she was just talking about, we put them in the description. Please go and support her. She's given up her time and been brilliant. I've learned so much stuff. Keep watching this channel, hit the like button, and well, that's it. Just keep doing that.